The rain came down in cold, relentless sheets, soaking the city streets and blurring the headlights of passing cars. It was the kind of night people hurried through, clinging to umbrellas and dreaming of warm beds. But at the corner of Silverpine and Rosemont, beneath the flickering yellow light of a half-dead street lamp, a girl stood motionless. Her clothes clung to her frail frame, her shoes squished with every step she tried to take, and her stomach growled so loudly she wondered if the passing pedestrians could hear it. "Can I clean your house for food?" she asked, her voice nearly swallowed by the storm. People rushed by, pretending not to hear. Some looked at her with pity, others with suspicion. She didn't blame them. After all, who trusted strangers anymore? Especially strangers who looked like they hadn't slept in a bed in weeks. Her name was Emery, and she was just 19. But the last few months had aged her in ways mirrors could never fully reveal. It had all started when her mom passed. Cancer took her fast, leaving behind hospital bills, an empty apartment, and no one left to care. Emery tried. She worked late nights at the diner, skipped meals so she could pay rent, and walked to work to save on bus fare. But when the landlord raised the rent without notice, she couldn't keep up. Within 3 weeks, she was on the streets, clutching a backpack with 2 pairs of socks, her mother's old locket, and a folded photo of them laughing at a county fair. Each night since had been a battle between safety and sleep. Each morning, a gamble between hope and hunger. Tonight, though, Emery was desperate. Her knees ached from walking all day. She hadn't eaten in almost 2 days, and the cold made her fingers too numb to hold the cardboard sign she'd made. She spotted a long, winding driveway at the edge of the street, guarded by an ornate black gate. Past it stood a massive house, no, a mansion, lit softly from within. Even through the storm, she could make out the pillars and large windows and the glow of warmth that spilled onto the wet lawn. With no better plan, she crossed the street and approached the intercom. Her finger hovered over the button. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself. But her stomach grumbled in protest. She pressed it. There was a pause, then a static click. "Yes." Emery leaned close. "Hi. I'm sorry to bother you this late. I'm not asking for money. I'm just hungry. I can clean, I can cook. I just need something to eat." There was a long silence. Then, "Wait there." The gate buzzed and slowly opened. Emery blinked, shocked, then shuffled forward, wiping her face with her wet sleeve and trying to look less like a drenched stray cat. The front door opened as she approached, revealing a tall man in his early 40s, dressed casually in dark jeans and a gray Henley. He had neatly trimmed dark hair, some silver near the temples, and eyes the color of old whiskey. He looked at her, and for a second, his face froze. Completely froze. "Is everything okay?" Emery asked, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look. The man didn't speak right away. He stared as if he were seeing a ghost. Then he stepped aside slowly. "Come in before you freeze to death." She entered the house cautiously. The warmth hit her skin like a blanket. The floors were polished wood, the ceilings high, and the entire place smelled like vanilla and cedar. "Wait here," the man said, and he disappeared down the hall. Emery stood, dripping, her hands clasped awkwardly in front of her. She spotted a framed newspaper on the wall. "Trevor Langston, tech visionary becomes billionaire by 35. So that's who he was. She'd heard the name before, maybe on a podcast or somewhere in the news. But she didn't know much about billionaires except that they usually didn't open their doors to girls like her. Trevor returned a moment later with a large towel and a clean hoodie. "Bathrooms down that hall. You can dry off and change. I'll make you something to eat." Emery's eyes welled up with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "Thank you." Inside the bathroom, she peeled off her wet clothes and dried off, wrapping herself in the oversized hoodie that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something expensive. She looked in the mirror. Her cheeks were pale, her lips dry, and her eyes red from the wind, but still, there was a glimmer of the girl she used to be. When she returned to the kitchen, a plate of steaming grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup were waiting on the counter. "I hope that's okay," Trevor said. "Didn't know what you liked." "It's perfect," she said, her voice cracking. He sat across the island and watched her eat, not saying much. Emery devoured the food slowly at first, then hungrily, the warmth spreading through her body. After a few minutes of silence, Trevor finally asked, "What's your name?" "Emery." He blinked. "Emery what?" "Emery Cole." And there it was again, the pause. The look. Trevor's mouth opened slightly, and his hand gripped the side of the counter. I knew someone named Cole. A long time ago. My mom's name was Shannon, Emery said, her voice quieter. She passed a few months ago. Trevor turned pale. "I'm sorry," he said, almost whispering. "Shannon Cole, from Dallas?" Emery's eyes widened. "Yes. You knew her?" Trevor stood slowly, almost as if the room were spinning. He looked at Emery again, harder this time. And then his voice cracked in a way that made Emery sit up straight. "She was the love of my life." Emery's breath hitched. The spoon in her hand trembled slightly. "What?" "I met her when we were both in college," he said, sitting back down like the air had left his lungs. "We were young, stupid. I had dreams of building something big. She wanted something simpler. We fought. I left. I always wondered, what would have happened if I stayed?" Emery stared at him in disbelief. "She never talked much about the past," she said softly. "Only that some guy broke her heart, and she never looked back." Trevor laughed bitterly. "That sounds like her." A long silence followed. Thunder rumbled outside. And then Trevor looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Are you mine?" The words landed like a crash of lightning. Emery's spoon dropped to the floor with a clatter. What? "I need to know," he said. "How old are you?" 19. Trevor's face paled. Emery stood slowly, the chair squeaking against the tile. "My mom said she raised me alone because she had to. That she made mistakes, but she did what she could. She never told me," Trevor whispered. "She never told me she had a daughter. Because you were already gone." Emery backed away, unsure if she should run, scream, or cry. But she didn't do any of those things. She stood there, chest rising and falling, as the man who might be her father, who had unknowingly cooked her a grilled cheese and opened the doors of a mansion to a stranger, stood across the kitchen, eyes filled with a pain so raw she could feel it from across the room. Neither of them moved. And for a moment it was just the rain outside, beating against the windows like the sound of a broken past trying to get in. Trevor stood still, like the truth had knocked the wind out of him. Emery watched his face, searching for something, denial, maybe. Or guilt. But what she saw was heartbreak. A delayed, almost unbearable kind of pain that seemed to come crashing down all at once after 19 years. "I can't believe this," he muttered, sitting down slowly, resting his elbows on the kitchen island and holding his head in his hands. "She never told me, all these years." Emery wasn't sure how to respond. Her stomach was full for the first time in days, but her heart now carried a weight she didn't know what to do with. She crossed her arms tightly and stepped back, uncertain if she should stay or run. "I didn't come here for anything," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "I just needed food. I didn't even know who you were until I saw the picture on the wall." Trevor looked up at her, his eyes glossy. "I know. I believe you. But, if what you're saying is true, if you're really Shannon's daughter, that means I walked away from a child I never even knew existed." The weight of those words silenced the room. The rain had slowed to a drizzle outside, and the kitchen lights glowed softly, casting warm shadows across the counters. Emery stared at the floor. My mom, she was sick for a long time before she told me anything, Emery said. She left me a letter the night before she died. She said she was sorry. That she'd made mistakes trying to protect me. That there was someone she once loved, someone who might have changed everything if things had gone differently. Trevor rubbed his hands over his face. God, I was so young. So focused on my career, on building my company. I thought I had time to fix things later. But I guess I didn't. Silence again. Then Emery asked the question that had been building in her chest. Why did you leave her? Trevor swallowed hard. Because I was afraid. Afraid that loving her meant letting go of everything else I thought I wanted. I convinced myself that we were too different, that she'd be better off without me. She wasn't, Emery said quietly. He flinched like she'd hit him. And then she added, but she still made sure I had everything I needed. Even when we had nothing. Trevor stood and walked slowly to the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. I don't expect anything from you, Emery said, her voice tight. I'm not here for money or some fairy tale. I've been on my own for a while now. I've learned how to survive. Trevor turned around, his jaw clenched. You shouldn't have had to. She blinked. I missed 19 years, he said. I missed your first steps. Your birthdays. School dances. Everything. Emery's lips trembled, and she turned away, trying not to cry. It was all too much. Too fast. She didn't want to feel anything, didn't want to give this man the power to hurt her. Not after all she'd already survived. Do you have anywhere to stay tonight? He asked gently. She hesitated. No. But I'll find something. I always do. You're not leaving, Trevor said, a firmness returning to his voice. You're staying here. At least until we figure this out. I'll give you a guest room, new clothes, whatever you need. I'm not a charity case. I didn't say you were. His tone softened. You're my daughter, Emery. And I'm not letting you sleep on the street. She stared at him, trying to gauge if he really meant it. If this was some emotional reaction that would fade come morning. But his eyes were steady. Honest. I don't even know you, she whispered. Then let's change that, he said. The guest room was bigger than the apartment she and her mother used to share. The bed had fluffy white pillows and a comforter that swallowed her up like a cloud. She showered in a marble bathroom with golden fixtures and wrapped herself in one of the softest robes she'd ever felt. But none of that stopped the thoughts from racing. She lay there staring at the ceiling, the rain now just a distant whisper on the windows. Her mind kept drifting back to her mom's smile, to the stories she never told, to the life Emery might have had if things had gone differently. She didn't know what to think of Trevor yet. He seemed sincere. But so did a lot of people, until they left. Still, something about the way his voice cracked when he said her mother's name, the way he looked at her like he was seeing a piece of his own heart, made it hard to ignore the pull in her chest. Downstairs, Trevor stood in his office, staring at the same photo he hadn't touched in over a decade. Shannon, young and laughing, leaning into him on the beach during spring break. It was the last photo he ever took of them together. Now, their daughter was sleeping upstairs. And he felt more lost than he'd ever felt in his life. The next morning, Emery woke to the smell of pancakes and coffee. She crept downstairs and found Trevor in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like it was something he did every day. He looked up and smiled awkwardly. I figured we should start this day with something normal. Emery smirked a little. You cook. I used to. A long time ago. They sat in the sunlit breakfast nook. It was quiet, but not tense. Slowly, they began talking, about music, books, Emery's life, her mom's little quirks. Trevor didn't pry, but he listened. Really listened. Emery found herself telling him about the time her mom took her to a flea market to find vintage records, or how they used to sit on the fire escape in the summer and pretend the city lights were stars. Trevor laughed. Then paused. She used to do the same thing with me, he said. Except we were in Austin. She said the world looked different when you imagined it from above. Emery smiled faintly. She always had a way of making life feel magical. They grew quiet again. Later that day, Trevor made a phone call. A DNA test. Just to be sure. Emery agreed. She wanted the truth, too. But even before the results came, both of them already knew. They saw it in each other's eyes. They heard it in the way they talked, like they'd known each other longer than just a day. And for the first time in a very long time, Emery felt like maybe she wasn't alone. 3 days later, the envelope came. Trevor didn't open it alone. He waited until Emery had come down for breakfast, dressed in fresh clothes he'd bought her from a nearby boutique. Her hair was still damp from the shower, and she looked more like a regular teenager now than the girl who'd knocked on his door 3 nights ago, desperate for a meal. They sat at the same kitchen island where she'd eaten that first bowl of soup. He held the envelope in his hands, turning it over slowly. I already know what it's going to say, Emery said softly. Trevor looked up. Me too. But sometimes it helps to see the truth written down. He broke the seal. There, printed in black ink, it was undeniable. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Trevor stared at the paper. His breath caught. Emery watched him, unsure of how to feel. There was no celebration, no tears, just quiet acceptance of a truth that had always existed, waiting to be uncovered. He placed the paper down on the counter. I missed so much, he said, his voice barely audible. I don't even know how to make it up to you. You don't have to, Emery replied. You didn't know. That wasn't your fault. But it still happened. Yeah. It did. But you're here now. She wasn't sure where those words came from, but they surprised both of them. Trevor stood, walked to the window, and looked out over the driveway. The storm had passed days ago. The sun was high, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. A peace had settled over the house, a fragile, healing kind of peace. I built all this, he said, motioning around the room. The company, the money, the house. I kept telling myself I'd enjoy it one day, when I had someone to share it with. Emery swallowed. He turned back to her. Now I do. If you want this, I want it too. I know it'll take time, but I'd like to be your father. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a request. It was a hope, raw and vulnerable. I don't know what that looks like, Emery whispered. I don't even know how to have a dad. Then we'll figure it out together. A long silence followed. And then, slowly, Emery nodded. The weeks that followed were full of strange, beautiful adjustments. Trevor took time off from the company he'd once obsessed over. Emery moved into the guest bedroom at first, then eventually chose one of the upstairs rooms, the one with the best view of the city skyline. They started small. Breakfasts together. Walks around the property. Trevor taught her how to drive, something she'd never had the chance to learn. Emery introduced him to her favorite indie bands and made him watch cheesy rom-coms that Shannon used to love. But the journey wasn't perfect. Some nights, Emery cried in her room, missing her mother so badly she could barely breathe. Trevor gave her space but always left a light on downstairs, just in case. Other times, Trevor struggled to balance being a father with the guilt of not being there sooner. Emery noticed it in the way his jaw tightened when she mentioned growing up without Christmas presents some years, or when she told him about the cold winter they spent in a shelter after eviction. But neither of them walked away. They talked. They learned. They healed. One afternoon, Trevor took her to a quiet cemetery outside the city. He brought flowers. Emery brought the letter her mother had written her before she passed. They stood together by Shannon's grave, the breeze gentle against their backs. "I wish she could see us now," Emery said, kneeling beside the stone. "She can," Trevor whispered. Emery placed the letter down beside the headstone and pressed her palm gently to the stone. "Thank you for keeping me safe," she whispered. "I'm okay now." Trevor knelt beside her, his arms slowly wrapping around her shoulders. They didn't speak for a long time. Months passed. Trevor helped Emery enroll in college, something she never thought she'd be able to afford. She chose psychology, wanting to understand people better, maybe even help kids like herself one day. They traveled together, her first plane ride. He cried when she walked across the stage at her high school equivalency graduation. She cried when he gave her a framed photo of Shannon on her birthday. Tucked inside was a small silver bracelet she remembered her mom wearing once when she was young. "I found it in an old box," Trevor said. She must have kept it all these years. The bracelet had Shannon's initials etched inside. Now, it was Emery's. On a sunny fall afternoon, Emery sat on the same porch swing Shannon once did when she visited Trevor's home long ago, before they drifted apart. The trees swayed gently, and the scent of cinnamon and crisp leaves filled the air. Trevor joined her with 2 mugs of hot apple cider. "You know," he said, settling in beside her, "you never asked for anything when you came here." Emery smiled softly. "I asked for food." He chuckled. "Yeah. But what you gave me was more than I can ever repay. You gave me a second chance." She looked out across the yard, where the golden sun painted everything in warm light. A dog barked in the distance, and wind chimes played a gentle song. "Sometimes the worst days lead us to the best things," she said. Trevor nodded, his eyes full of emotion. "You saved my life that night, Emery. I just didn't know it then." She leaned her head on his shoulder. And for the first time in a long, long time, neither of them felt alone.